The Book Visitors by Barney Beard. Chapter 4. Twila. Charlie was about to answer my question when we heard a voice speaking to us from the far corner of the dining room next to the window that looks out on the big oak tree in Grandpa's secret garden. The voice said, "Maybe it's an ordinary book, and maybe it isn't. Some books are commonplace, others remarkable. Good books take you places. You can't judge a book by its cover, can you? There's nothing like getting inside of a good book if you want to go places and see things. That's what I always say." Charlie and I heard the voice, but saw no one. At that moment, Grandpa's little statue of a fairy that sat on the little round glass table next to the bookcase on his Some of the Right Books fluttered its wings, flew into the air, and landed on the table just in front of us. Charlie and I couldn't believe our eyes. You can imagine. Grandpa's fairy statue is cute. Charlie and I had both admired it the evening we had arrived. It was lifelike, about a foot tall, colorful, a lifeless ornament made out of plastic and metal. It wasn't real yesterday, but today it was flying and talking to us, a living creature. What was going on in Grandpa's house? What had happened to us? Were we dreaming? We were pulled through the bow window by a book, and now Grandpa's statue was talking. It suddenly occurred to me we were having an adventure, and I knew what kind of adventure. I looked at Charlie, and Charlie looked at me, and we both looked at the statue of the fairy. "Who are you?" I asked the newly animated statue. The lively little creature we had watched flutter across the room and land in the middle of the dining room table was looking up at us. I'm sure when I spoke I sounded a little sharp, but I didn't mean to be. "Who do you think I am?" the statue asked, a smile appearing on her little face. "I have no idea, really," I answered. "You look like a tiny girl with wings, maybe a fairy. You look exactly like the little figurine Grandpa keeps on the table by his bookcase of special books." The creature fluttered into the air and hovered for a moment with a faint buzz of wings, and then came closer to us. She landed on the edge of the table immediately in front of Charlie, almost touching him. She looked straight up into his face. I could tell Charlie was frightened, but he didn't step backwards away from the table. I was learning there was a lot about Charlie I didn't know. "And you, young man, who do you think I am?" the strange little creature asked Charlie. "I'm sure I don't know," Charlie stuttered. "I thought you were a statue." "Grandpa has lots of statues and artwork around here," Charlie said. The statue looked up at Charlie. Charlie and I looked down at it. "I'm Twila," the figurine said, with an attractive, lively smile. "That's my name. That's who I am. I'm Twila." "A pleasure to meet you, Twila," we said in unison. "The pleasure is mine," Twila replied with a gracious little curtsy as she softly fluttered her wings. Twila was about a foot high with a light skin tone and dark brown eyes. Except for her wings, she looked like a tiny girl. To be more accurate, she looked more like a tiny woman than a girl. She had two sets of translucent wings like dragonfly wings. Her auburn hair was long and twisted into one round bundle tied at the end and pulled around in front of her left shoulder. She wore a light blue halter top with a pretty flower attached to her right shoulder. Her light blue skirt was especially pretty. It looked like a ballerina's tutu made from overlapping flower petals, expertly sewn together. She had long, slender legs with delicate boots, with turned-up toes, secured with fine leather laces around her ankles. Her boots matched her skirt. Perhaps the strangest thing of all was the tiny bluebird resting on Twila's left hand. The entire time Twila was talking to us, she held her left hand extended outward from her body, palm up. The little bluebird was always facing Twila and twittering. The little bluebird, about the size of the end of my thumb, would occasionally flutter away and land on Grandpa's curtain rods or the back of the chair, but would soon start chirping and fly straight back to Twila's left hand, landing lightly, its beak always facing Twila and chirping softly, as if the bird and Twila were communicating intelligently, which I now believe they were. "If you don't mind my asking," Twila said, "would you two please explain yourselves?" I was confused by Twila's question. I don't know how to explain myself, I answered. Me either, added Charlie. I have no idea what you mean. I don't think we've ever been asked that question before. I've never been asked that question in school. Twila looked up at the ceiling and stamped her little foot lightly and spoke to no one in particular. I wonder what they are teaching in these schools. Would you two please explain yourselves? Twila asked again with a demanding voice. Would you two explain your presence in this house? That's what I mean. Where do you come from and why are you here? Do you not know anything about yourself? Do you have a purpose? It's required you tell me. Oh, I see, said Charlie. I can tell you how we got here, but I don't think we can explain ourselves. We're not sure we understand what happened. We were outside drinking hot chocolate because we weren't supposed to be in Grandpa's kitchen near the bow window. Melody was trying to catch her book because it started flying. She caught it, and I caught her, and then the book pulled us through the bow window backwards, outside in. That's all I know, really. You may not believe me, but that's what happened. I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do. I don't believe I can explain myself or anything. Well, I've been watching you two, Twila said. I know what I saw, and I know why you're here. I know things like that. I know a lot more than you do. I know you came to visit the books. That's why you're here. It's obvious to anyone. What does visit books mean? I asked. It means what it says, Twila replied. Twila looked up at us and put her hands on her hips. The little blue bird fluttered away, landing on top of the bookcase by the front door. I know what you want. You want to go inside of a book. At least, that's what you said you wanted. That's why everyone comes through the bow window to see me. Helping people get inside books is my job. That's what I do. That's what your grandfather does. He and I are book conductors. Some people write books. Some people read books. Others visit books. When imaginative people want to visit books, I help them. I'm a book conductor. What do you mean? Charlie asked. I don't understand. How does anyone visit books? When you say visit books, are you talking about reading? Melody and I love to read. That's one reason we come to Grandpa's house. He has shelves and shelves of good books. His house is full of books. He lets us read all the time. Grandpa gave us a splendid nightlight beside our bed. He lets us read as much as we want to. We could read all night and he wouldn't say a word. He's not like our parents. He never tells us to turn off the light and go to sleep. Twila looked up at us and extended her left arm, palm upward. The little blue bird returned to Twila's open hand and began twittering. Twila twittered to the little bird. I am quite sure, now that I think about it, that the little bird was telling Twila something, perhaps something important. When the little bird finished twittering, Twila spoke to us. Charlie, Twila said sternly, have you had a recent head injury? I hope you don't play stupid football. That's not a good use of your head, not at all. I don't mean reading books. If I meant reading, I would have said reading. I meant visiting. Visiting is the word I use. There's a big difference between visiting books and reading books. Of course visiting is what I meant. What else? When Twila said this, she looked at us and stamped her little foot. The little blue bird flew out of her hand once again and perched on the top of the lampshade between the couch and the piano. I'm sorry, Twila, I said apologetically. Charlie and I don't mean to be disrespectful. This is new to us. We've never been through the bow window before, frontwards or backwards. We're confused. We don't understand what has happened, and you're the first statue we've ever talked to. Twila looked up at the ceiling and spoke in a voice that was quite loud for such a little person. I don't know what this generation is coming to. What can they be teaching in those schools? Do they never read the right books? It used to be called the library. Now it's the media center. Children don't know a thing about reading, using their imagination, or going inside books. Oh dear, too much television, oh dear. Sports and television, what's the world coming to? After her little speech, Twila faced us and held out her little hand. The little blue bird fluttered back into her palm, twittering softly. Twila smiled at the little bird and twittered back for a moment, then laughed lightly and spoke to us. You're forgiven. I have been reminded you two are fledglings, and this is your first time here. Nonetheless, you're well behind in reading and imagining. If you two don't get a move on, you'll grow up to be ordinary, blunt as a dull knife. You two need a great deal of remedial work in reading, imagining, and inventive thinking, not to mention writing. No television or video games for a while, no phones or computers. It's time you two began using your heads for something more than a convenient place to attach your ears. You need to work on your thinkers. More questions, more words, more writing, more imagination, that's what's wanted. You two need to think for yourself. Ask questions about everything. Did I mention words? Charlie and I grinned at one another. Twila was saying something quite familiar. If you will pardon me, Twila, I answered with a big smile, you sound exactly like Grandpa. He says stuff like that all the time. Every time he writes a letter, he has stuff like that. And that's the sort of thing in most of his books. Twila grinned. Of course he does. He and I are on the same page. Where do you think he gets his ideas? Said Twila. I've been giving him advice for years. He doesn't always know it, but your grandfather gets his new ideas from me. I'm his calliope, his muse, if you're familiar with that word. I've been around for a long time, a very long time. Your grandfather calls me his idea fairy. I'm not really a fairy. I don't like to be confused with common fairies. Tinkerbell is a fairy. I'm not a fairy. If you'll notice, I don't look like Tinkerbell, and her wings are different. Tinkerbell and I are quite distinct, as you can see. If you'll pardon my asking, if you're not a fairy, what exactly are you? Melody asked politely. Twila looked up and quickly looked back and forth at Charlie and me about 10 times and shook her head with a sad look on her face. The little bird twittered to Twila, and Twila twittered back and then spoke to us. It's worse than I thought. You two are as thick as 2 short planks. I don't understand children these days. Too much television, sports, and video games. Not enough reading. Melody, I'm a conductor. I'm Twila, the book conductor. Your grandfather's book conductor. That's what I am. I've been a book conductor for a long time, and I took your grandfather on his very first book visit when he was younger than you. I take inquisitive, imaginative, adventurous children and adults into books on literary excursion. Kind of like tourists on a guided holiday. I take mostly children, but occasionally I take creative adults, if they're not too far gone. I've been taking your grandfather on regular book tours for quite a few years now. That's interesting, I said to Twila. That would explain some things Charlie and I have been wondering about. Is your job showing us a book and explaining what the author said? Do you mean visiting books would be like taking a tour of a museum or an art gallery, or taking a tour of Rome or Venice? Like a lecture by a professor, or reading that long introduction at the beginning of classics? Twila stamped her foot and then stamped it again. The little bluebird fluttered out of her hand and landed on top of the bookcase by the front door. I'm going to ask you again. Would you two tell me how you came to be here? Charlie and I looked at one another. Yes, ma'am, I'll do the best I can. Charlie and I are visiting our grandfather because our parents are on holiday. We're glad we came. We enjoy being here. Grandfather is a lot of fun to be around, and he lets us do stuff. Well, Twila said, I hope it's not too late. Your grandfather warned me you were coming for a book visit, but I expected you sooner, much sooner, to tell the truth. What do you mean sooner? Charlie asked. We just got here yesterday afternoon. We could hardly have gotten here sooner. You two are late, about 6 years late. Your grandfather has been concerned about your stunted imagination for years. I had hoped that by this time I could have taken you on a great many book visits before you're too old, before your imagination wilted and calcified entirely, before you became too much like an adult. What do you mean, too old? We're not old. Grandpa is old. We're just kids. How could we be too old for book visits? I asked. Twila turned sideways and looked at me with one eye, then with a frown shook her head, side to side, slowly. It looks like I'm going to have to explain every little thing to you dunderheads. Thick as 2 short planks, that's what you are, thick as 2 short planks. I can see your imaginations have begun to atrophy. I suppose adults have told you to grow up. How unfortunate. Grown-ups don't know what they're missing. Twila continued. All children are born with abundant stores of creativity, of imagination, if you will. Children are born to learn. Children don't need expensive toys. Children can play with anything because they have the vivid imagination they're born with. However, Children must use their imaginations or they lose it as they grow older. There's nothing that kills the imagination quicker than videos and television. Your grandfather and I have been worried about you two, that we might lose you both to the book dragon." "What do you mean, book dragon?" "There isn't a real book dragon, is there? Isn't he a figment of Grandpa's imagination, something in one of his books?" "Your grandfather didn't invent him. The book dragon is real. Oh my, yes, there is a book dragon, a very real, very nasty book dragon. He exists on both sides of the bow window. Your grandfather is one of the few to have been imprisoned by the book dragon and escaped to tell his tale. Not many ever gained their freedom once chained in his lair. In the book dragon's mental prisons where captives are slowly transformed into gibbering idiots with big, round, unblinking eyes, their heads full of trivia and a smartphone in each hand." "Grandfather was captured by the book dragon?" I exclaimed. "He was," Twila answered with a serious look. "He was chained in the book dragon's dungeon for years, for decades. The book dragon's lair is dark and damp, crawling with spiders, with flat-screen televisions everywhere, everything sensual, nothing rational. All the connected people are there. During his imprisonment, your grandfather was never allowed a book. He was forced to watch the news and weather 40 times a day with 5-minute commercials every 30 seconds. When he wasn't watching news or weather, he was watching sports and shows with advertisements for everything: beer, makeup, fast food, new cars, with actors who spoke faster than you can think. He wasn't allowed one moment to be rational because of the media tubes that connected to his head." Charlie and I shivered to think of the dungeon, the creepy crawlies, and the media tubes. "What are media tubes?" Charlie asked. Twila looked up at Charlie and shook her head again and put out her hand for the little bluebird. It fluttered down from the bookcase by the front door, twittering all the way. Twila twittered back for a moment and then spoke to Charlie. "That's a good question, Charlie. You are showing signs of slipping into calcified adulthood, but there is hope. Keep asking questions. The book dragon uses media tubes to pump endless Hollywood videos directly into his victim's brain. Sweetened sewage. That's what he did to your grandfather's mind when he was younger, filling his head with irrelevant data, endless sound bites, mountains of dumb stuff day after day, news, sports, weather, commercial shows, news, sports, weather, commercial shows, news, sports, weather, commercial shows, morning, noon, and night, an interminable stream presented as candy-coated goat guano, marketing marshmallow manure meltaways. Your grandfather's mind was pumped so full of cod-swalloping crapola that he had no time to think for himself. He became a media addict, his head overflowing with blathering bilgewater and bandering balderdash, tortured by the media tubes whose diameter increased every year. An addict, pleading for more data. He never had a single thought of his own. Like all book dragon victims, your grandfather's brain shrank. Instead of reading, he became a watcher, watching shows, weather, NFL football, NHL hockey, the cooking channel, and carnivorous cage fighting. As his eyes grew, his mind shriveled. The book dragon was pleased. "Oh my, how dreadful. We don't want that." "I should hope not," Twila replied. "It was terrifying to see your grandfather with large-diameter plastic tubes conducting multimedia mush directly into his head as he sat on the couch drinking beer. There's nothing worse than watching and drinking. That will shrivel your brain and fill it with drivel." Charlie and I looked at one another. We couldn't believe what we were hearing. "That couldn't happen to us, could it?" I asked. "Well, I'm afraid it's already happening. That's why you're here, why your grandfather arranged this book visit. He's worried you'll grow up to love sweetened sewage and candy-coated goat guano, and that you'll be seduced by iPads, computers, video games, and phones, corrupted beyond repair. He doesn't want you to become an addict, to text all day, never reading a book, never write a letter, never think, a wilted watcher. The book dragon hates you. He despises children. He wants to fill your head with meaningless nonsense so you won't be able to think for yourself. You're lucky to be here today. Many children don't have a grandfather who cares about their thinker. Your grandfather and I hope this is the first of many book visits that will help you avoid being captured by the book dragon. The desire of his black heart is to obliterate your imagination, rot your rational mind, turn you into boring, tiresome adults watching action movies every evening. He wants to bury you under a mound of media malarkey, to fill your heads with gobbledygook, claptrap, gibberish, and twaddle. He wants your brain to rot like a cantaloupe left under the bed all summer. The book dragon wants your head to crawl with maggots, buzz with fruit flies. That's a terrible thing, Charlie said as he turned a bright shade of green. He looked awful. I thought he was going to throw up. I can't imagine being forbidden to read books. Who would do such a thing? I asked. Twila looked up at Charlie as she gave the bluebird a little lift into the air which sent it flying to the top of the some of the right bookshelf. It landed on the edge of the giving tree, twittering boldly as it turned towards the children. This is depressing, Twila said. We've spoken enough about the book dragon. I don't want to talk further about such horrible things, Twila said quietly. Let's talk about why you're here. Let's talk about good things. That's just the point, Melody said. We don't know why we're here. You've explained a lot of things, but why we're here is still a mystery. All I know is I'm still here because I tried to catch a flying book. Twila put her hands on her hips and looked up and shook her little head. Oh my, she said out loud. You two are almost gone. I see it. I guess I'll have to get busy before it's too late. You two must come with me now, this instant. There's not a moment to lose. How do we go with you? Where are we going? Melody asked. We're going to do exactly as you suggested when you were drinking your hot chocolate and sitting on the wall, Twila replied. We're going inside a book this very moment. Your book. This book here on the table. Anne of Green Gables. We've no time to lose. Are we really going inside of a book? Charlie asked incredulously. Of course you are, Twila answered. It's what you asked for, isn't it? Of course you're going inside. It would be no use to go outside, for that's where you are now. How will we do it? Melody asked. It's simple, Twila said. Do what I say and use your imagination. We were interested. We wanted to go. We love to read books. We vigorously nodded our agreement. Yes, we're ready to go. This will be fun. Okay. Before we jump into the book, I must tell you the rules for the book visitors, Twila said firmly. First, book visiting is like life. There are no guarantees. You may come back and you may not. There is danger in visiting books just like mountain climbing or scuba diving. Book visiting is not predictable. It can be risky, but book visiting can change your life. It can take you places you never dreamed of. Do you still want to go? Yes, ma'am. We trust you, we answered. We believe Twila. Your grandfather knows there are things best learned firsthand, things in books. Secondly, when we're visiting books, you must obey me. If you don't obey, terrible things can happen. You could be chased by crocodiles, trampled by elephants, lose your hair, be eaten by cannibals whose favorite is hominoid veal, like you two. You can never tell what you'll encounter when you're on a book visit. Why is that? Charlie asked. Twila laughed. Silly. If you had read more books, you'd know that you can't predict what you'll find because authors are unpredictable. Authors imagine all sorts of peculiar things and put those strange things into their books. You never know what mysterious thing they'll write next. I know what's in a book. If you obey me, you will save yourself from being devoured by giant hairy spiders or falling into a vat of flesh-eating cockroaches. Do you agree to obey? We immediately agreed. Thirdly, Twila said emphatically, I'm not permitted to leave you inside of a book. That would never do. It's possible for you to get inside of a book without my guidance, but you'll have to write that book yourself. If you write a book yourself, you're allowed to go inside any time you wish. Author's privilege. There's one more thing. There's a safety measure you must take with you while book visiting. Do you see that mahogany box over there? Yes, ma'am, we see it, we answered. Please open it, Charlie. Charlie opened the little box carefully. What do you see? There are 2 silver chains, each with a silver ornament attached, Charlie said. Exactly, Twila replied. Give one to Melody and put them around your necks now. We did as instructed. The chain was of fine Iberian silver and had an ornament attached about the size of a silver dollar. On one side was the image of the man in the crescent moon holding a book. He was reading. At his side was an old-fashioned inkpot with a goose feather. The man in the moon was surrounded by embedded diamonds, glittering like little stars. I liked the ornament immediately. On the reverse side of the moon coin were the words, "Reading, the quintessential, Don Quixote de la Mancha." I asked Twila what the word quintessential meant. "I don't have time to explain," she said in a flurry, continuing her instruction. "Learn that when you get back. This necklace is for your protection. Wear it always. Guard it as you would your life. Without it, you two might find yourselves lost on a book visit, never to return." "How can it save us?" "These medallions will bring help in time of need. Senor Quijana gave these medallions to your grandfather for book visitors to wear when traveling with me, in case of danger." "How does the moon coin help in time of danger?" "That is a good question. During book visits, wear the medallion at all times, even when asleep. If mortal danger should overtake us, one of you must throw your moon coin high into the sky. As you throw, shout the words on the back, 'Don Quixote de la Mancha.' The moon coin will sail above the clouds, where the chain will hang suspended upon a certain star, reflecting the light of the sun around the earth, bringing you relief. Use the moon coin only in case of extreme danger. Also remember this. When your rescue arrives, it may be in an unexpected form. Never judge a book by its cover. I'm sure I never do." Twila made Charlie and me repeat the instructions about the moon coin until we had them committed to memory, especially the part about not judging a book by its cover. "Are you two ready for your first book visit?" Twila said in a flat, matter-of-fact voice as she looked up at us with a serious expression that quickly melted into a smile. Charlie was as excited as I was. We were actually going inside of a book for real. It wasn't our imagination. What adventures would come our way in the pages of a book? Where would we go? What would we see? What would we learn? I couldn't wait for our journey to begin. End of chapter 4.